Confidence comes from self-assurance. It's not the absence of having anxiety.
I'm fine. I'm self-reliant. I'm stoic, yet I'm more irritable. I'm reactant. I'm really suffering inside internally.
You have to feel like you're going to be safe and protected in that type of environment.
Fast forward years down the line, looking at a 50 or 6-year-old man who spent their lifetime not ever expressing what they want, what they need.
Of course I'm going to be shy. Of course I'm not going to want to socialize. It makes sense if you look at the receipts.
Right?
Right?
What therapists will often talk about is
Hello, everyone. This is Dominique Hamler, Executive Director of the Los Angeles Outpatient Center. Welcome to our Roundtable series. We're back again, and we're addressing today's topic that is close to many of us, right? Men's mental health. And I have two very special guests with me. Mental health struggles impact everyone, yet men often face these unique societal expectations and barriers to seeking support. Joining us today, we have Kim Ronan and Morris Clardie, LAOP's own. I'm going to ask these very special guests to introduce themselves. Kim, take it away.
Thank you, Dominique. Hi, my name is Kim Ronan. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and currently in private practice here in Los Angeles, where I work with adults and couples with a focus on men's mental health and men's issues, as well as sex therapy. Prior to that, I worked for 15 years in the county, mostly along law enforcement and also in suicide prevention. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
All right, so now we're going to have LAOP's own Morris. Take it away.
Yes, how's it going? My name is Morris Clardie Jr. I'm also a licensed marriage and family therapist here at LAOP. Background is, of course, working with the general population in regards to mental health. I have some experience working with children and families, as well as doing some private practice working with, again, just people with victims of crime, just general mental health in that population.
Men often experience these societal pressures to be like strong and stoic and, oh, you can't cry and you got this, right?
Yeah.
You know, to be kind of self-reliant. We know in that role, it can be kind of, you know, a little discouraging to seek out mental health treatment. Kim, in your experience, how do these societal expectations impact men's willingness to seek support?
This is a great question and a very big one. Yeah. I think how we think about men and masculinity from a societal and stigma, it impacts them greatly. And I'd probably say that's one of the main barriers that we see. What therapists will often talk about is internalizing. And so we see men often internalize their problems, which basically means that instead of saying things outwardly, they suppress their emotions. And when we do that, you know, we see instead of coming and talking about it, they will avoid things or they will withdraw from things. We can see a lot of shame, being self-critical. This is where we see addiction maybe pop up. The consequences of the societal norms, I think, of men to be tough, to be stoic, really sends the message that for some reason they should handle their problems on their own. And it's seen as weak. And I would argue differently, I don't know, but I think it's very brave and very strong to seek help.
And it's very isolating when you feel like you're struggling by yourself, right?
Yeah.
Morris, I want to ask you a question.
Yes.
In your experience, what are some misconceptions about therapy, right? Because everybody has their own idea what therapy is.
Yeah.
And this also tends to discourage people,
Definitely.
specifically men, discouraging them from reaching out. How do we break down these barriers?
To piggyback off of what Kim said, you know, there is the societal norms of just being emotionless, being stoic, needing to be the burden of just trying to carry everything on our shoulders, trying to, you know, handle fatherhood, you know, work-related issues, family dynamics. I mean, all those things play a role. We can look at cultural being another component. We can look at environment being another component of why we shouldn't seek out out mental health. But then there's other misconceptions that, tie into like, well, mental health is for like crazy people, right? Where, if I'm going to mental health, I'm crazy, I'm labeled as crazy, I can't, deal with things, I can't, talk about my emotions, right? So you see that component. Then you see the idea of being vulnerable, right? Men are told not to be vulnerable. We're not told to be emotional. So that component is a big misconception because we're human. We have emotions. We need to talk about our emotions. We need to be able to express and get it out. There's a misconception of us being weak. So if I'm vulnerable, I'm weak. And men are, projected. We're told to be strong. We're told to, be, self-reliant. So if I show a sign of weakness, it talks about my personality, and it also talks about my masculinity. There's also the misconceptions where you see things in regards with it being too expensive, right? The therapist is not relatable to me because, they're females, and so they don't understand male problems. They don't understand men's gender. They don't understand all of these things. So you run into these misconceptions, and it ties into just awareness and just insight building, right? But it also tends into, like, again, if I'm struggling, what should I do? Should I, cope the normal way, the way that society has told me to do, or should I actually go seek the mental health professions that are there to assist? And as far as breaking down those barriers, I feel like you should, one, come off of being open-minded. I feel like when you're open-minded, you leave room for opportunities of growth, right? I tell a lot of people, like, we're trees here. We should be growing. We should be always trying to improve. So if you're trying to just navigate things through just the lens of just doing the way you've been doing in regards to just coping from substance or drinking or doing anything in regards to reckless behavior or showing irritability or anger, you're not leaving yourself open to pour out these emotions. So I think that's one component. Understanding what mental health is. I mean, mental health is it's a spectrum, right? So there's maintenance mental health, and then there's the psychiatric part of mental health. And I feel like when you build that awareness up, when you build that insight up, you can understand what the difference is and what that looks like. I feel like that will also help people recognize and understand why therapy is so important and essential, because it is a long-term journey. It is something that you need to do on a day-to-day basis.
And just as another myth too, I mean, I think therapy, right, that it's going to be another person, maybe even another woman telling them what to do or making them talk about feelings. And
Definitely.
It's like, while that's a component, most of therapy is not telling somebody what to do, right? It's about your journey, you being able to decide what choices in life align with what you want, and we're just there to like shepherd that and guide that. And so point out that myth.
No, you're right. I think it's in that sense of like, oh, I'm just there to talk and I don't want to talk about feelings. Some men, we're very practical. We want solutions. We want to find answers, and we do leave space for that. We're trained to, show different lenses, show different types of perspectives, right? To help you navigate through the stresses, to help you navigate through relationships. It's not just talking. It's not just talking about emotions and feelings and everything like that. So again, it's just being open-minded to that and leaving space for that was so important in regards of, mental health. And being ready, I think that's also a big component. And a lot of us are not ready to actually tackle onto those things. The readiness of being in mental health plays a big role of just growth as well.
I think that's a big piece of it too. If you're not feeling safe where you're going and being vulnerable and opening up yourself, you have to feel like you're going to be safe and protected in that type of environment. So that's the other part. We want to make sure. You guys know this. We created a discussion forum so our audience can feel safe. That's their word again, safety. And comfortable asking questions, because these are the experts, guys. I have my subject matter experts right here for you. So each of these questions will shed light on challenges that specific men face and explore different aspects of mental health that aren't always openly discussed. The first question was specifically about therapy for men. And one of our listeners asked, I read therapy is mostly tailored to women. Is this true? In what way does therapy for men need to be approached differently?
So, good question. Is therapy tailored for women?
Yeah.
No. And I'm happy to report that, I've seen a trend. I have a practice that is thriving, and it's a lot of men, right? At least half, if not more. Maybe the misconceptions, I think, around that therapy is for women is that therapists tend to be predominantly female, so thank you for joining us today, Morris, and representing. Right. And also in what I was talking about earlier, where women do tend to externalize their problems. They're comfortable talking and seeking that help. It takes a little bit of a hurdle to your second question, like how would we tailor therapy to men differently? It's not that we are like extraordinarily different when we're in the therapy room. We still have pain, hurt, disappointment, grief, loss, struggles, depression, but the societal norms would be something that probably I'd have to spend a lot of time with men, maybe kind of debunking that, right? Just to, in the beginning stages of grief, like you talked about building trust. I'm a woman. I've never talked about any of this before, let alone out loud to a stranger. Just getting that alliance is what we call, or rapport built in therapy might take a little bit longer with a man who this is their first time sharing something very personal and deep and painful. And then you mentioned, I think in a little bit before, like being solution focused, but paying attention to the language that we use, not to stereotype, but maybe men don't want to hear a lot about vulnerability or feelings, and we frame it in a way of strength and building confidence, using language that resonates with men, using analogies, right?
Yeah.
Sports, business, not to be cliche, but it's helpful to put things into men's. We're talking about mainly cis men here in the US, so we realize that's a broad stereotype, but I would say that would be some of the things that I would see maybe differently. But once you get past those hurdles, you really recognize that men and women, we're all human. We all have, similar desires and hopes and dreams.
Yeah. To piggyback off of that, again, I think everything you said is completely valid, is completely true, of course, in regards to just how we do internalize, how we do not want to express our emotions, be vulnerable. We don't do it amongst our friends, we don't do it amongst our families because of societal norms, because of the culture, because of the environment, because of the religion, perhaps. What makes me want to do it from a total stranger standpoint, right? Especially if she's a woman, especially if she's unable to relate. One thing that I like to add is, in regards with approaches when it comes to therapists, we're trained to meet you where you are, too, right? Yeah. So, I've had discussions in my own personal experience of like asking the client, what are their needs? How would they like to talk about things in treatment? Just so I can get a sense of where they are, how they want to approach the situation in regards to treatment, because it's their treatment, it's not mine. And I want to emphasize that so I can build on that rapport. I want to build on that trust to at least leave the opportunity for me to, of course, help them look at things from a different lens, but also challenge, right? Because challenge comes with a lot of making sure that I trust my therapist, and I want to, feel this comfort level to be pushed in the direction that I'm possibly not wanting to do. I also can see that, you see that this is a, career-led female-driven therapy, and it is hard. I run across a lot of people who are like, so Morris, you're a therapist, oh my God, this is like a rarity, and there's actually a lot of men out there that do therapy, and I understand that you do see more women here, but from my own personal experience, again, I've had female therapists too who I've allowed to just sit with me and meet me where I was at, because I knew that I needed a different lens. I knew I needed a neutral party rather than someone that I knew of, or someone who I did trust and they could do something to where they're biased and they're showing me a wrong door to go into that could lead to more problems and more struggles and more issues that I have to deal with as I get older. So I think it's just so important to, again, going back to what I said in the beginning, being open-minded, right? Kim, you had said something in regards with the analogies thing, and I laugh because I'm a person who likes to use simple analogies, and I talk to a lot of people, a lot of clients that I've had, like, I take things to an elementary, right? Pretend you're a car, right? Or pretend you have a car in this case, right? You take your car into a mechanic, especially if something is wrong. You don't know the mechanic, right? It could be a girl or it can be a guy, right? But you want your car fixed. You want it to be able to, take you places, get you somewhere, right? And I said, okay, well, this is like how mental health is, right? Where if you know that you're struggling with something, if you know that you have depression, if you know you have anxiety, you have a lot of these traumas that are impacting relationships, impacting the work-related field, right? You want to be able to go get a maintenance, right? Right? So when I use those analogies, when I try to really simplify, take things back, have people take a step back and seeing the different ways of how they can go about their mental health, I feel like that can also lower the guard and lower the stressors in regards of, these fears and these myths and these barriers that they put in place when they're trying to get mental health.
It's individualized care. So it's not a cookie cutter, okay, you're male, so you get this treatment plan, right? So it's very individualized. And then this opened my eyes, what you said, Morris, about like a sounding board, like a neutral party. I never thought about it. But in my experience with the therapist, I need that neutral party just to kind of help me see things that's not so, polarizing sometimes, right?
Exactly,
so I love that. How do you cope with looking intimidating or tough, but also being shy and socially anxious, which can make people feel uncomfortable? How do you deal with the expectation to be outgoing and confident?
To answer both of these questions, it's kind of going back to the beginning, the societal norms, right? Wanting to put on this face of intimidation and toughness, but then having this underlying feelings of anxiety and social anxiety. And again, it kind of goes back into, of coping, right? When I'm doing these things, I'm not being authentic, I'm not being genuine, so therefore I'm suppressing, right? And I'm internalizing, right? When I'm showing up here, I can't be genuine, so therefore now I'm creating anxiety because of now the judgment card, because of maybe how I am presenting, right? And to answer the question about coping, again, when you're having anxiety, when you're having depression, you need a plethora of skills, right? You need to, I'm not going to use the typical breathing exercises and stuff like that, which you typically hear, but I really focus on like distraction. I really focus on just being mindful, building the awareness component, right? So if I'm socially shy and if I'm not able to have like these authentic communication conversations with people, I want to build on those skills. I want to be able to build confidence in those skills. That's what's going to boost my self-esteem, right? A coping skill also is not really trying to fit a norm that society has built for me, right? I want to do it in my model. I want to be able to do it without having judgment in the background of my head and just being me, who I am as a person, even if that means I don't know how to speak relatively well or if I am really good when it comes to just short talk, right? So I think strengthening that and really looking into what fits you best and how that looks for you is what's also a good way of coping as well. Highlighting strengths and not trying to really look at, oh my God, I'm doing this, I can't do this, so I need to mask just because society tells me to, or because society wants me to be tough. Being tough and being well-spoken, that's a good thing as well, right? And being able to be vulnerable and being authentic is just as masculine as anything.
There you go.
I mean, confidence comes from, self-assurance. It's not the absence of having anxiety, right? That's not the goal. We build strength, we build confidence by moving through it, moving forward with it. And to your point about like expectations and society, like when we show up in life, and this is true for anyone, right? But, we're talking about men. Like when we align our choices in life with what we value, who we represent, that brings confidence. Where we breed anxiety and despair and stress is when we're acting in a way that isn't in alignment with us. Right. And, that is a hurdle when, we see what we're supposed to be. Yeah, I would just encourage them to get that inner strength of working on their anxiety, and that confidence will carry.
I've experienced that, just so you guys have some, information on that. I understand when it comes to masking. I understand about trying to show up and being social when I have like shy tendencies, or I don't want to talk to people because of the judgment part. Right. But one thing that I've also really instilled in myself, again, this is practice on my end, is what I just said, practice, right? I think the practice to communicate, to have conversations, to actually sit in the uncomfortable and actually engage and really take away from this judgment, societal expectation card that I have in the back of my head and just be me and continuously work on that. Practice, you hear the model, practice makes perfect. Right. I go off of practice makes permanence. If I keep practicing this, I'm going to get better at it eventually. I'm going to get good at how to speak to people, how to talk to people, how to get to know people, how to listen to people, how to react and respond to people. But if I'm not doing this on the day-to-day basis, if I'm not maximizing on my opportunities, of course I'm going to be shy. Of course I'm not going to want to socialize. It makes sense if you look at the receipts.
Right?
Right?
Take a look at the receipts.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, from the coping component, it's again, what am I not doing? Because I can continuously stay in this shy model, or I can actually do something about it. I can talk about things that I actually do enjoy and get good at that strength. And I don't have to mask anymore.
Can you explain the symptoms of covert depression, or how depression symptoms might look different in a man versus a woman experiencing depression?
Covert depression, maybe even in clinical terms, we might have said atypical, basically means that what we think about for depression is typically internalized feelings of sadness, withdrawal, emotion. What we see in men is they tend to have externalized symptoms of depression. So this is where we see them acting out, feeling irritable, having anger, even with substances. So, and can be very high functioning, right? Still talking about that mask, right? It doesn't look like somebody who's just home alone, curled up in the blankets, very withdrawn, like they are out there going. And so we often will not see them in the therapeutic room, and they might not even have insight that they have depression. So this is where we see men, showing up with physical symptoms and seeing their doctors about chronic pain and headaches, or we might see them in the addiction world showing up at rehab. So really masking this underlying depression. Yeah, that's how we see it showing up a little bit differently, hopefully with a little bit of education, or just even the curiosity of, can things be better in my life, that they walk into a therapist room. And it can be helpful for some to frame things in like, oh, you might be depressed, and that's okay. There's a lot we can do to help you, whether it's through talk therapy or coping or medications, yoga. Maybe not, but
It can happen. It can happen.
It can happen.
It certainly can. Moving your body,
There's a lot of ways we can cope with depression. Just getting outside, right? Getting some sunshine.
I agree to that again, 1,000%. Another thing is denial, right? I'm not depressed, However, my external behavior suggests that I'm doing things that it is impacting my mental health, is impacting my well-being, is getting me in the space where I'm short-tempered, is getting me in a space where I'm not able to maintain relationships, right? I'm using now, I'm passively, having SI, which is suicidal ideations, or self-harming myself. What does that look like? Because it looks different in everybody, right? Yeah. So, again, thinking of just what covert depression is, and you have touched on this in regards to just functional depression, is how am I presenting and the world while I'm struggling inside, right? So this is where I put on my mask again, right? Where I'm masking to fit a societal norm, to fit the description of like, I'm fine, I'm self-reliant, I'm stoic, yet I'm, partying a lot, I'm reckless, I'm more irritable, I'm reactant, I'm, really, really suffering inside internally to where, I'm going to erupt eventually.
I see that white knuckling, as we call it. Like, I'm just going to, and it's heartbreaking because you can start to feel a lot better sooner rather than waiting for a crisis or waiting for something really devastating to happen.
There is a safe place for you, a safe space for you, and you don't have to mask. Right? We're going to help you. We're going to help you cope. We're going to help you live a better life as a man. One listener that asked, there's so much advice for women on self-care, which is true, But as a guy, the advice seems limited to like, oh, you could just go to the gym. Why don't you lift some weights?
Yeah.
Why is that the case? And is it even good advice?
It is actually good advice, especially if it fits you, if that's something that you're into, right, in regards to utilizing exercise and gym as an outlet to get out that energy that needs to be, put out. It's typical because, again, going back to societal norms, going back to just the model of what men are supposed to do, what we see on social media plays a role, right? You see men in the gym, you see men getting stronger, you see men doing this as a form of coping, right? But maybe that's not the case. Maybe that's something that you are not into. And I'm a big advocate of just diving back into yourself. What makes you happy, right? What are things that you do enjoy, right? I love playing football, right? So I'm going to do whatever it takes for me to get into some form of football, right? Or watch football, or get engaged into something in regards with a physical activity that has nothing to do with just like heavy lifting. I love my creative side, right? I enjoy music. These are escapes. These are coping skills that I've used on my personal experience to be able to navigate elsewhere. I enjoy outdoors, just being outside and being around things that are not really causing a distraction is also a very helpful way to cope. Being amongst others who are just as supportive as you are in regards with these things that are struggling, with mental health, with, fatherhood, with relationships, that's very important, right? Oftentimes we're into gaming, right? Why not be in gaming, right? Why not do something to where you're exploratory, right? Where you're exploring like avenues of reading or writing or just any of those things that kind of tie into just what are my passions, what are my interests, what are my curiosities. I feel like that plays a big component in regards with coping skills and just going straight to working out. Oftentimes it's also probably doing nothing. That's a coping skill too,
like
right?
that.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah. Look at self-care as universal.
Yeah.
I think that's the key here, right? Because as much as you hear women in regards with them having spa days, having all these things, right? We can go get a massage too, right?
Yeah.
We can go and just be at the beach and just hang out, go get some sun, go get something to where you are just at peace, right? I'm in search for peace, and I think peace is a lot of things that we can do outside of going to the gym.
Again, I think it goes into like the stereotypes of like that therapy is, for women. Also, the self-care tips sound very womanly, like Dominique was saying. But I would argue too that we've just done a really bad job in talking about what self-care is. Because for some of us, it does look like having downtime, right? Some of us, and whatever you want to do in that downtime, whether it's have a potato day or go to the gym, indulge, right? But not all self-care looks like that. Sometimes self-care is largely things we don't want to do, right? So self-care can look like very simple things like just going to bed early if you have a big day and not saying yes to going out with your friends that night. Self-care can look like, I'm not going to get the home food delivery and I'm going to try to make a healthy meal for myself, or just saying no in general, like having boundaries. So self-care is very broad. The gym, it's good advice, like you were saying. If you need to be that person whose self-care looks like doing things, sometimes self-care looks like doing less.
We have to assert our boundaries, you guys. That's a form of self-care.
It is a form of self-care. And again, not to stereotype, but I said I work with couples and I work with men. And let's say women generally are very good in the art of dishing with their friends and talking openly about their problems. They will maybe consult with 4 people by the time they get home at the end of the day and have that discussion with
I do that.
you, right? And so what I hear a lot from men, right, and this is where therapy can be helpful because emotional intelligence is partly like proper communication, they really feel ill-prepared to have important, hard conversations. And so they avoid having them. And that leads into that internalizing, or it causes problems in relationships because they're like, she's going to win every argument. And I will say it's not about winning, but that's also something that I see a lot of avoidance of conflict, and how that shows up for men is not having these conversations, not setting the boundaries, not saying no when they don't want to do something. And then fast forward months, years down the line, looking at a 50 or 60-year-old man who spent their lifetime not ever expressing what they want, what they need. It's really starting from scratch. Come to therapy early. No.
Come to therapy.
You don't have to come to therapy to learn this, but this is one place where you can start to practice that.
Because what I'm thinking too, what's happening to your physical body, right? When you're compacting all of that stress, anxiety, I mean, you're going to start having health problems.
Absolutely.
Before we close, what tips are you going to give these men to say, you know what, you got this?
As far as getting into mental health, I understand there's the fears and the barriers that were listed. But again, this is for your treatment. This is for your opportunity of growth. A therapist will meet you at your needs, right? But another good thing is that you can pick and choose your therapist as well, right?
That
right.
part.
So this is where you ask questions. You kind of identify things that you can relate to, that you can see that you can build a good, strong relationship with a therapist, whether it's a male or a female. I think that is something that we forget. I think that we just go into therapy, we find a therapist, and we just got to stick to that therapist. And thus, there's the treatment resistant that you go through. There's just the disconnect that you go through. So therefore, you're going to think that therapy is not fit for you, right? So you can consult. You can choose your car just as much as you can choose your therapist, right? So that is a good tip going into. Another one, again, being ready to have these vulnerable conversations, sitting the uncomfortable, being open-minded, not really focusing on judgment, not really trying to fit this societal norm identity that, society, social media, the news, your family, your friends has fit for you, right? You fit yourself. And once you are ready to, tackle that head on, I think that's when the motivation and the drive and the reality of growth starts to become more prevalent.
Right. Therapy, there is a place for everyone at the table. The literal table. It being Men's Mental Health Month, we didn't talk a lot about statistics, but there are real consequences. When we look at populations of men, they still largely are the ones who are dying by suicide at higher rates. Feelings of despair and just really, struggling. It is urgent, in my sense, to get this message across and know that it's important. Know that we, as therapists, man, woman, young, old, want to see you in their offices or just, even being involved in community, whether it's sports or therapeutic groups, anything that gets you around others will be helpful. So
thank you once again, Kim and Morris, so much for your expertise. Appreciate you coming and sharing with our audience. To our listeners, remember, mental health is health. It's just as vital as your physical health. Seeking support is a sign of strength, not weakness. If you'd like to learn more about our services here at Los Angeles Outpatient Center, hit us up on LAOPcenter.com. We always welcome your questions, topic suggestions, so feel free to leave them in the comment section. Take care, and remember, prioritizing your mental health is a powerful step towards a healthier and happier life. See you next time. Thank you, everyone.